Hello, in this video we're going to examine objects in JavaScript. This example demonstrates the use of objects. Let's start out by looking at line 1. Here we can see we declare a variable and have an assignment operator. So the thing on the right hand side of the assignment operator actually goes for the next 6 lines, and we can tell this is an object literal because it has swirly braces. Inside the swirly braces, an object literal has a number of properties. Here's one, here's another, here's another. Each is separated by commas, and each has a name and a value. The name is string, and the value can be any one of the data types that we use in JavaScript. So we see here a string, another string, a number, and a Boolean value. So what is an object? Basically, an object is a collection of properties, or variables if you like. So I'm just going to draw something over here to represent my object with each of the properties described here. So I'm going to create one for first name. It's going to have a value Daniela. Another for last name with a value Smith, a string. Another called age with value 17, a number. Another called fees paid with the value true, a Boolean. We said we're creating a variable called Daniela. What gets assigned to my variable Daniela is what's known as a reference. And a reference is something that just points to an object. So when we assign values for things like strings or numbers, we just get the value itself stored in the variable. When we have objects, then objects are sort of something bigger than a variable, if you like, and we end up with references to it. We can then refer to properties of an object by referring to the variable, in this case Danielle, and the property name. So we can see an example of that in the next 3 statements. First off, we see on line 8, we create a new variable called candidate. We assign to candidate a value that is stored in the variable Daniela. So if we have a look at Daniela, it stores a reference to my object. So what ends up in candidate is exactly the same thing. Also a reference to the same object. So if we have a look at what happens on the console log lines, well, we log a string that says Daniela is, and then we refer to the variable Daniela, and we use this dot syntax to then refer to a particular property of this object. So Daniela points to an object, and when we say dot age, we select the particular property here, which is 17. So this log statement would print out Daniela is 17. The next statement says console log, and the difference with this one is that it refers to the candidate variable instead of Daniela. And we know that both of these variables point to the same object. So actually this statement has much the same effect. Obviously, instead of printing Daniela as it prints candidate is, but it still prints the value 17. We can also use this dot syntax to modify properties of an object. So here on line 12 we say Daniela.age is the left hand side of an assignment, and we have the value 18 on the right hand side. If we do this, we replace the value 17 that's stored in the age property of this object with the value 18. So line 13 has a different style of syntax that can also be used to refer to and modify the properties of an object. There are some restrictions when using this dot syntax. that we saw on line 12, and that is that the property name must follow the same rules that variables use. So can't have any spaces or punctuation, can't begin with a number, and can just be made up of letters and numbers. We can also have property names that have spaces or special characters, so that is allowed, but if you want to specify them, you need to do so by using the square bracket notation and specifying the property name as a string. So we can see here inside the square brackets we have a string literal, so the string is just written in place. So this is the left-hand side of an assignment, and we're just, in this case, selecting the fees paid property of the object that the variable Daniela points to and setting the value to false. Line 15 does much the same thing. We're assigning the string blue to a property called parking permit. Now the thing to note about this is our object doesn't have a property called parking permit, but objects in JavaScript can have dynamic properties. You can just create these properties after the fact, even if they didn't exist when the object was originally created. So what happens here? Literally just the object gets a new property. It's called parking permit, and it has a value, a string, blue. So that's the effect of line 15. The other useful thing that we can do with the square bracket syntax is we don't have to use a string literal. We can use a variable, and the variable can contain a string. So as long as the value within the square brackets evaluates to a string, that's completely fine. So on line 17, we create a new variable called property. We give it a value parking permit. And we then use that variable value on the next line to log out the parking permit property of the object that the variable Daniela points to. The effect of logging this, obviously we have the value blue in there, so this line here would print blue. Next, we update the value stored in that variable that we just created, property, and we store a new value in there, which is age. We then do exactly the same line. This time our property variable refers to the age, which is false here, so this line would log out false. Okay, so that's a quick overview of objects and how referencing of objects works. Thanks for watching.